Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm Mark, and I'm genuinely excited to be here with you today as we open up some truly profound material.
And I'm Jane, delighted to join you on this journey. And hey, if you're finding these deep dives valuable, maybe consider subscribing to the channel. That way you won't miss any insights we uncover.
Definitely, because today marks the beginning of something pretty special. A three-part deep dive. We're getting into one of the most pivotal and, frankly, just astonishing works in the Baha'i Faith, Shoghi Effendi's The Promised Day Has Come.
That's right. This is part one.
And our mission, really, across these three parts, is to journey into the very heart of this extraordinary writing. We want to explore its historical context, understand not just what happened, but why this book was even written, and what its core messages are, specifically from a Baha'i perspective.
Exactly. And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how Shoghi Effendi, in his role as the guardian of the Baha'i Faith, he gives us this remarkably clear lens, you could say, to view world events.
The lens? How so?
Well, he presents them not as just random things happening, these sort of chaotic occurrences, but as part of a profound divine process. It's really a call to understanding, and ultimately it's a call to action, in our own lives and in how we think about shaping society. It really shows us the purpose of religion, of spirituality, as the Baha'i writings reveal it.
That's a powerful framing. Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's jump right in. All right, so Shoghi Effendi opens The Promised Day Has Come with an image that just it immediately grabs your attention. A really striking declaration right from the first page that sets this tone of, profound global significance. He writes, and I want to share this quote because it's so vivid, "A tempest, unprecedented in its violence, unpredictable in its course, catastrophic in its immediate effects, unimaginably glorious in its ultimate consequences, is at present sweeping the face of the earth."
Wow.
That's not just describing chaos, is it? It feels like a cosmic narrative almost.
Yeah. It absolutely is. And that imagery, it immediately brings up a critical question for anyone really thinking about it. What exactly is this tempest he's talking about?
Right.
And he elaborates, describing humanity as bewildered, agonized, and helpless watching this great and mighty wind of God invading the remotest and fairest regions of the earth.
He goes on, doesn't he? Rocking foundations.
Yeah. Rocking its foundations, deranging its equilibrium, sundering its nations, disrupting the homes of its peoples, wasting its cities, driving into exile its kings, pulling down its bulwarks, uprooting its institutions, dimming its light, and harrowing up the souls of its inhabitants.
Yeah.
I mean, when you read that, you can't help but think of the major wars, the economic collapses, the massive social unrest of the 20th century, and frankly, a lot of what we still see today.
It still is very current, yeah.
It's not just about, isolated conflicts here and there. It's about a fundamental shaking of the world's very foundations, a global upheaval.
It really paints this picture of overwhelming forces at play, almost apocalyptic in their scale. The sheer magnitude of the disruption he describes is just immense. But, okay, if this is a tempest, what's the deeper meaning behind all this chaos? From the perspective of this book, what's Shoghi Effendi really trying to tell us beyond just the devastation?
Okay, so here's a core insight, and it really sets the Baha'i perspective apart. For those who've recognized the claims of Baha'u'lláh, he's the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith, and his forerunner, the Báb. Well, for them, this tempest isn't just random chaos. It's not just the result of human mistakes.
Okay.
Their followers know full well whence it comes and what it will ultimately lead to. It's understood as this judgment of God.
Good judgment. That sounds heavy.
It does, but it's crucial to understand it's not just about punishment. The text describes it simultaneously as a retributory calamity and an act of holy and supreme discipline.
Discipline. Like a corrective measure.
Kind of. And maybe most importantly, it's at once a visitation from God and a cleansing process for all mankind. Ah, okay. So it's not just an end. It sounds like it implies a beginning, too. Like these difficult times are actually purposeful.
That's the idea.
But then how do these, historical prophetic warnings apply to our lives right now? What does this mean for you listening today as you try to navigate the complexities of the world? It sounds like more than just a historical forecast. It feels like a living reality.
Precisely. The text suggests that these fires, quote unquote, they punish the perversity of the human race and weld its component parts into one organic, indivisible, world-embracing community.
Wow. Okay. Weld them together through fire.
Think about that. Even suffering in this view has a transformative purpose. Humanity is being simultaneously called upon to give account of its past actions and is being purged and prepared for its future mission.
Purged and prepared For what?
Well, this points to a larger divine purpose behind all the convulsions we see in the world. It's preparing humanity for what Baha'i teachings describe as a culminating and blissful stage in its evolution, a unified global society. So when you look at current events, you could see them through this lens of, like, grand historical pressure, designed to refine us, bring out our unity.
That's the framework, yes. It's about recognizing the birth pangs of a new world, maybe, rather than just the death throes of the old one.
That's a powerful way to reframe how we understand global challenges. Okay, before we dive deeper into those historical warnings and, the consequences of the world rejecting this message, it feels really essential to understand the fundamental principles that the promised day has come is built on.
Absolutely.
What are the bedrock beliefs, the core tenets of the Baha'i Faith, and how do they inform this profound message of, judgment and transformation? Because it's clearly not just a story of decline. There's a blueprint for renewal in there, too.
It's a crucial point. Without grasping these foundational ideas, the rest of the book might seem, pretty daunting, maybe even misinterpreted. The preface of "The Promised Day Has Come" states it very clearly. The fundamental principle enunciated by Baha'u'lláh is that religious truth is not absolute but relative, that divine revelation is a continuous and progressive process.
Okay, hold on. Religious truth is relative, and revelation is progressive. That sounds radical, especially compared to how many people think about religion.
It is radical. It challenges centuries of exclusive religious claims. Put simply, it suggests that all the great religions of the world are divine in origin, that their basic principles are in complete harmony, that their aims and purposes are one and the same, that their teachings are but facets of one truth.
So not separate conflicting paths.
No, more like different stages of one unfolding spiritual education for humanity.
Wow. This concept, progressive revelation, that truth isn't static, it really reshapes how we view history, doesn't it? It implies this grand unfolding narrative instead of just random events. This view, where each faith represents, what did you say, successive stages in the spiritual evolution of human society, that offers a profound framework for understanding not just history, but human development itself.
Right.
It means we don't just see historical events as random. We can see them as part of a divinely guided process.
Yeah.
Humanity slowly, maybe painfully, but surely moving towards maturity.
Precisely. And flowing directly from this core principle, the Baha'i Faith upholds the unity of God, recognizes the unity of his prophets, and inculcates the principle of the oneness and wholeness of the entire human race.
Oneness of humanity, that's central.
Absolutely central. It proclaims the necessity and the inevitability of the unification of mankind, asserting that this unification is gradually approaching, and claims that nothing short of the transmuting Spirit of God, working through his chosen mouthpiece in this day, can ultimately succeed in bringing it about.
So it's not just a nice idea, like a philosophical ideal.
No, it's seen as a spiritual imperative, a driving force for planetary civilization. And the text emphasizes that the faith itself is essentially supernatural, supranational, entirely non-political, non-partisan, meaning it aims to exalt no particular race, class, or nation. It asks its followers to subordinate every particular interest, be it personal, regional, or national, to the overriding interests of the generality of mankind.
That's a truly global vision. But how does this actually apply to our everyday lives and the purpose of religion itself? Because, let's be honest, for many people, religion can sometimes feel separate from daily life, or worse, a source of division. This sounds like a dramatically different take.
It fundamentally reshapes our understanding of spiritual practice and its practical application. First, it enjoins the primary duty of an unfettered search after truth.
Unfettered search after truth, so no blind faith.
Exactly. Blind adherence to dogma or tradition is actively discouraged. Instead, we're encouraged to investigate reality for ourselves with an open mind. It also unequivocally condemns all manner of prejudice and superstition, aiming to dismantle the very roots of conflict between people and groups.
Which are huge problems.
Huge. Crucially, it declares the purpose of religion to be the promotion of amity and concord, a direct antidote to sectarianism and religious strife. And perhaps most uniquely, it proclaims its essential harmony with science and recognizes it as the foremost agency for the pacification and the orderly progress of human society.
Harmony between religion and science, that's another big one.
It is. It means our spirituality isn't separate from our intellect or our social responsibilities. They are intrinsically linked. True faith, in this view, must be rational, progressive, and contribute directly to human flourishing, working hand in hand with scientific progress. It's a very holistic approach, really, to what faith means in the modern world.
Okay, that sets a powerful stage for understanding the context. Now, the promised day is come dedicates significant passages, really central passages, to the immense suffering endured by Baha'u'lláh, the founder of the Baha'i Faith.
Yes, it's a major theme.
It highlights the depth of his sacrifice. Can you walk us through some of the historical hardships he faced? And why is this level of suffering so central to understanding his revelation and its significance?
Right. The story of Baha'u'lláh, whose original name was Mirza Hossein Ali, starts in Mazandaran, Persia. His coming was actually foretold by his forerunner, the Báb.
We'll get to the Báb soon, I imagine.
We will.
Yeah.
Baha'u'llah's mission was met with severe persecution almost immediately, right from the outset. He was imprisoned in Iran, then banished from his native land in 1852. This kicked off a series of exiles.
A whole chain of them.
A whole chain. First to Baghdad in Iraq, then Constantinople, then Adrianople, which is now Edirne in Turkey, and finally, the worst of all, the prison city of Akka in Ottoman Palestine.
And he stayed there.
He remained incarcerated for no less than 24 years in Akka. He eventually passed away there in 1892.
24 years in one prison city.
After all the other exiles, just think about that. A life defined by continuous exile and imprisonment. And this was someone born into a life of comfort and privilege, a nobleman. A stark contrast.
That's an astonishing amount of time under duress. 2.5 decades just in Akka after all those banishments. You'd imagine such conditions would just stifle any creative or expansive work.
Yeah.
What was he doing during these banishments and imprisonments? How could a divine revelation flourish in such a harsh environment?
Well, this is what's truly remarkable. It almost defies comprehension. In these incredibly trying circumstances, particularly in Adrianople and Akka, he formulated the laws and ordinances of his dispensation and expounded in over 100 volumes the principles of his faith.
Over 100 volumes while imprisoned.
Yes. When we say dispensation here, we mean his specific era of divine revelation, like the Christian or Islamic dispensations before him, each bringing new teachings for its time. It's almost inconceivable that such a vast, profound body of sacred scripture, containing laws for a new world order, could be revealed by someone held as a state prisoner.
That's mind-blowing.
And even more astonishing, he proclaimed his message to the kings and rulers of both the East and the West, both Christian and Muslim. He directly addressed figures like the Pope, the Caliph of Islam, the chief magistrates of American republics, the entire Christian priesthood, various religious leaders.
So literally writing to the most powerful figures on earth from a prison cell.
Exactly.
So his message wasn't just for his immediate followers. It was this universal call aimed right at the top, at the most powerful figures of his time across the globe. What was the essence of this monumental proclamation? What was he telling them from his confinement?
He proclaimed his revelation, summoned those whom he addressed to heed his call and espouse his faith, warned them of the consequences of their refusal, and denounced, in some cases, their arrogance and tyranny.
Strong words.
Very strong. He himself testified to the profound weight of his mission and, frankly, the world's indifference. He stated, "We verily have not fallen short of our duty to exhort men and to deliver that whereunto I was bidden by God, the Almighty, the All-Praised. Had they hearkened unto me, they would have beheld the earth, another earth."
Another earth.
And powerfully, almost with this sense of divine exasperation at humanity's spiritual blindness, he asked, "Is there any excuse left for anyone in this revelation? No, by God, the Lord of the mighty throne, my signs have encompassed the earth, and my power enveloped all mankind, and yet the people are wrapped in a strange sleep."
A strange sleep. That really captures it. It highlights the gravity of the message and the world's profound missed opportunity, despite the immense effort and sacrifice.
Okay, so the narrative of Baha'u'llah's life and suffering is, as you said, inextricably linked with his forerunner, the Báb.
Yes.
His story is equally, maybe even more dramatic in its brevity and the sheer intensity of the suffering. What were his experiences? How did they set the stage for Baha'u'llah's subsequent revelation?
The Báb, which is a title meaning the gate, was affirmed by Baha'u'lláh himself as the point, round whom the realities of the prophets and messengers revolve. His ministry was brief but absolutely spectacular. It began with sudden arrest and confinement in his very first year after declaring his mission.
Right away.
Immediately, he endured public affront, strict and prolonged incarceration in the bleak fastnesses of the mountains of Azerbaijan. The text specifically mentions the fortress of Maku, and he described his situation there with truly heartbreaking imagery. He said the fortress inmates were confined to 2 guards and 4 dogs. Picture, then, my plight. Just 2 guards and 4 dogs. That paints such a vivid picture of loneliness, complete isolation.
Utter isolation, far from any human comfort. He described his own suffering by saying, "None of those gone before me have suffered what I have suffered, nor any transgressor endured what I have endured."
That's a powerful statement about the uniqueness of his ordeal.
Huh.
What was the ultimate fate of the Báb, and what impact that dramatic ending have both on the early Baha'is and maybe on the world stage?
He suffered the shameful infliction of the bastinado, which was a brutal public beating on the soles of the feet, and ultimately he was executed by a firing squad.
Firing squad.
Yes. The text gives a truly chilling description. Suspension in the barrack square of Tabriz and the discharge of a volley of above 700 bullets at his youthful breast under the eyes of a callous multitude of about 10,000 people.
700 bullets. 10,000 people watching.
Culminating in the ignominious exposure of his mangled remains on the edge of the moat without the city gate. His passing, happening in such a public, dramatic, and frankly miraculous way, there were unusual events surrounding the execution itself, is described as having marked the consummation of all ages and fulfilled the promise of all revelations.
Consummation of all ages. What does that mean exactly?
Basically, it means his suffering and martyrdom were seen as the climax of prophetic cycles throughout history. It prepared the ground, spiritually consecrated it, you might say, for the next major divine revelation, which was Baha'u'llah's. So it wasn't just a tragic end, but a pivotal spiritual event signaling a new era. #tag 2.3 Baha'u'llah's unprecedented anguish and divine confirmation.
Okay, so we have the Báb's martyrdom setting the stage. You mentioned Baha'u'llah's 24 years just in Akka, but The Promised Day Is Come goes into much more specific detail about the severity of his suffering. It paints a picture that is just, almost unfathomable in its depth and constancy. Can you paint an even clearer picture for us, using the text, about the sheer intensity of his anguish?
It's hard to convey, really. Baha'u'lláh himself cried out in his writings, "The cruelties inflicted by my oppressors have bowed me down and turned my hair white." He used these powerful, almost visceral analogies to describe the torment, the constant barrage of afflictions. "Before me riseth up the serpent of wrath with jaws stretched to engulf me.
Goodness.
And behind me stalketh the lion of anger intent on tearing me in pieces. And above me are the clouds of thy decree, raining upon me the showers of tribulations, whilst beneath me are fixed the spears of misfortune, ready to wound my limbs and my body."
So it wasn't just physical pain.
No, it was a profound spiritual agony, too, witnessing the world's deep-seated rejection of the message he brought.
It's hard to imagine that level of sustained suffering, not just for days or weeks, but for decades. Was there a period that was particularly intense? An ordeal that stands out?
Yes, a crucial defining episode was his imprisonment in the Siachal. That literally means black pit in Iran.
The Black Pit. Even the name sounds horrific.
It was an infamous subterranean dungeon. He described it as foul beyond comparison, a dark and narrow pit, wrapped in thick darkness. And it was filled with criminals, nearly 150 souls, thieves, assassins, and highwaymen.
So he wasn't even isolated. He was thrown in with violent criminals.
Exactly. The experience was so harrowing that he stated, "No pen can depict that place, nor any tongue describe its loathsome smell." Yet, and this is the astonishing part, it was in this very dungeon, amidst this utter degradation and suffering, that it was mysteriously converted into the very scene of the annunciation made to him by God of his prophethood.
Wait, his call to prophethood happened there, in the Black Pit.
That's what the writings state. A moment of profound spiritual revelation, a divine confirmation occurring in the absolute depths of physical torment and squalor.
So even amidst the deepest suffering, this profound spiritual transformation, this divine annunciation occurred. What were the physical consequences of that specific imprisonment? Did the marks of that cruelty stay with him?
Oh, absolutely. The physical toll was immense and lasting. There's an account from Abdu'l-Bahá'u'llah's son, an appointed successor, recorded by Dr. Ethlemont. Abdu'l-Bahá described seeing his father come out for exercise from the Black Pit.
What did he say?
He said, Baha'u'llah's terribly altered, so ill he could hardly walk, his hair and beard unkempt, his neck galled and swollen from the pressure of a heavy steel collar, his body bent by the weight of his chains.
Chains and a collar.
Yes. Another chronicler, Nabil, recounted how for 3 days and 3 nights, no manner of food or drink was given to Baha'u'llah, and the place was infested with vermin. The stench, he wrote, was unbearable, and the text states the marks of this cruelty remained imprinted upon his body all the days of his life.
Unbelievable.
And this specific ordeal, the Black Pit, was itself preceded and followed by other grave trials, being stoned by angry mobs, other incarcerations, being publicly bastinadoed, subjected to monstrous accusations, having his house sacked. It was just relentless.
This level of detail makes the suffering incredibly palpable. How long did this entire period of intense suffering and banishment last? And what makes it so unique in religious history, according to Shoghi Effendi?
Well, this long banishment, which started with that edict from the Shah, it extended over a period of more than 40 years.
40 years?
40 years, carrying him successively from Persia to Iraq, then Sulaymaniyah, then Constantinople, Adrianople, and finally the penal colony of Akka. And Shoghi Effendi asserts that this captivity in its range, its duration, and the diversity and severity of its afflictions is unexampled in the history of previous dispensations.
Unprecedented in all of religious history.
That's the claim. Baha'u'llah himself summarized it when addressing the kings of Christendom. He said, 20 years have passed, O kings, during which we have, each day, tasted the agony of a fresh tribulation. No one of them that were before us hath endured the things we have endured.
He directly called them out on it.
He did. He challenged them, asking pointedly, is it not your clear duty to restrain the tyranny of the oppressor, and to deal equitably with your subjects, that your high sense of justice may be fully demonstrated to all mankind? It's a striking indictment, really, emphasizing that the world's leaders were aware of his plight, but did nothing, thus bearing a collective responsibility.
The narrative of suffering, however, doesn't end with Baha'u'llah. It continues with Abdu'l-Bahá, his appointed successor, and described as the perfect exemplar of the faith. What were his experiences? How did his lifelong ordeal contribute to the faith's early history and its survival, despite such hardship?
Right. Abdu'l-Bahá's story is inseparable from his father's suffering. He was born in the very year the Babi revelation began. Shoghi Effendi uses this powerful phrase, saying he was baptized with the initial fires of persecution, literally from birth.
From birth.
From birth. At only 8 years old, he was an eyewitness of the violent upheavals that rocked the early faith. And crucially, he shared in all of Baha'u'llah's exiles and imprisonments, including the indignity of being imprisoned again in Akka shortly after they arrived there.
So his entire life, pretty much, from childhood to old age, was spent in exile or under confinement.
Essentially, yes. A life of adversity and struggle literally lived within the confines of exile and prison.
It's truly remarkable to think of someone living like that, yet serving as the head of a growing global faith. What was his specific role amidst this continuous adversity? How did he manage to guide a burgeoning community under those conditions?
He became the center and pivot of Baha'u'llah's peerless covenant and the perfect exemplar of his teachings. Now, the covenant here is key. It refers to Baha'u'llah's clear appointment of his successor, a unique feature in religious history designed specifically to prevent schism after his passing. And Abdu'l-Bahá, too, was made to taste the cup of woe. Despite being under continuous scrutiny, repeated investigations, and the target of continual assaults and insults under various tyrannical rulers, particularly Sultan Abdulhamid and later Jamal Pasha during World War I.
So constant pressure.
Constant pressure. Yet he tirelessly worked to spread his father's faith. He interpreted the teachings, inspired countless individuals through personal example, and guided the growing Baha'i communities worldwide through literally thousands of letters or tablets and personal encounters, even traveling to Europe and North America after his release from confinement. His perseverance was just extraordinary.
And what was his message during these trying times? Did his own prolonged suffering make him temper his warnings, or did it maybe intensify his calls for humanity to wake up and embrace unity?
His messages were unsparing, really, born of deep anguish for humanity's plight, but also infused with profound hope. He gave warnings which both his pen and voice have given in countless tablets and discourses about the impending chaos, the approaching upheavals, the universal conflagration.
He saw the world wars coming.
He spoke very clearly about the dangers leading up to World War I. Even as an old man, his heart was, as the text says, bleeding over the immediate destiny of God's wayward children, witnessing the seeds of global conflict being sown. Yet, amidst this boundless service, he also expressed this deep yearning for release from the difficulties of this world. He prayed, "In the cage of this world I flutter even as a frightened bird, and yearn every day to take my flight unto thy kingdom. Ya Baha'u'lláh, make me to drink of the cup of sacrifice and set me free."
Wow. That's incredibly poignant.
His life just exemplified unwavering service and resilience in the face of profound hardship. He truly lived out the teachings he expounded, right to his very last days, the perfect exemplar.
Okay, after hearing about such immense sacrifice endured by the Báb, by Baha'u'lláh, by Abdu'l-Bahá, dedicating their entire lives to this message of unity and justice, the question just naturally comes up. How did the world, particularly its leaders, its institutions, respond? The promised day is come paints a really stark picture, doesn't it? Mostly global indifference and outright hostility rather than a welcoming embrace.
It does. The text laments this tragic reception almost with a cry of anguish. Alas, 1,000 times alas, that a revelation so incomparably great should have received at the hands of a generation so blind and so perverse, so infamous a treatment.
Strong language. Blind and perverse.
Yes. In its birthplace, Iran, or Persia at the time, a clamor, unparalleled in the history of Shia Islam, greeted the infant light of the faith. This intense religious fanaticism led directly to a persecution that mowed down with tragic swiftness no less than 20,000 of its heroic adherents.
20,000 people.
Yeah.
Martyred.
Yes, massacred simply because they refused to abandon their newly found faith. It was a brutal suppression on a scale rarely seen in modern religious history.
And beyond the horrific physical violence and massacres, what other forms of, maybe more insidious, opposition did the faith encounter from different segments of society? How else did they try to suppress this new message?
Well, beyond the physical torture, there were constant charges, so unmerited, of nihilism, occultism, anarchism, eclecticism, immorality, sectarianism, heresy, political partisanship.
Throwing everything at it.
Pretty much. And the text adds that each charge was conclusively disproved by the tenets of the faith itself and by the conduct of its followers. So it was often a deliberate campaign of misinformation designed purely to discredit the new religion.
Okay, what else?
There was also unmitigated indifference on the part of men of eminence and rank, a simple refusal to even investigate or consider the claims. Added to this was the unrelenting hatred shown by the ecclesiastical dignitaries, particularly from the established Islamic clergy, who clearly fear a challenge to their authority. And then there was the scornful derision of the people at large.
So hostility from the top and ridicule from below.
Right. And as we discussed, kings and rulers, despite being directly addressed by Baha'u'lláh, manifested utter contempt towards his messages. It was really a rejection at almost every level of society, from the highest echelons of power down to the common people.
So despite these direct personal appeals from Baha'u'lláh, the most powerful leaders remained unresponsive or even actively hostile. Who does Shoghi Effendi ultimately hold responsible for this widespread rejection and all the suffering that resulted?
Shoghi Effendi is very clear on this point. He attributes this lack of response and the active suppression to a generation, quote, sunk in self-content, careless of its God, and oblivious of the omens, prophecies, warnings, and admonitions revealed by his messengers.
So spiritual apathy and blindness.
Yes, and he explicitly states that the rulers and religious leaders who held unquestioned and absolute civil and ecclesiastical authority at that time bore the ultimate responsibility for any wrongs inflicted. He also notes that the masses back then were largely dominated and shackled, effectively robbed of the necessary freedom to even assess the faith fairly without coercion from those in power.
So the leaders bear the primary responsibility.
That's the assessment. And this pervasive resistance and rejection led Baha'u'lláh to utter a momentous and incredibly prophetic statement, one that has clearly unfolded over the last century or so. From two ranks amongst men, power hath been seized, kings and ecclesiastics.
Power seized from kings and ecclesiastics. What does that mean?
It's a statement about the decline of absolute temporal power, the power of monarchs, and absolute religious authority held by clergy. It predicted a seismic shift in global power structures, moving away from those traditional forms of absolute control. And we've certainly witnessed that firsthand.
This is where it gets truly fascinating, I think. The promised day has come. Details Baha'u'llah's specific personal messages, his tablets, to the most powerful leaders of his time. These weren't just general pronouncements. They were direct challenges, specific warnings, often delivered, as you said, from his prison cell.
Right.
Let's unpack some of these extraordinary communications. They offer such a unique glimpse into, well, divine revelation directly interacting with earthly power.
They really do. These addresses, Shoghi Effendi writes, in many cases constitute the most illuminating episodes in the history of the heroic and formative ages of that faith. Baha'u'lláh directly addressed most of the preeminent embodiments of power and of sovereignty in his day.
Was that common? Had other prophets done that?
It was truly unprecedented. No prophet before him had ever written individually and collectively to the crowned heads and rulers of the world in such a direct, personal, and authoritative manner, especially from a position of utter powerlessness as a prisoner and exile. It really underscored the universal nature of his revelation that was meant for all humanity, starting with its leaders.
He even wrote a tablet specifically for all monarchs, didn't he? The Surya Muluk, the Tablet of Kings?
Yes, he did.
What did he tell them collectively? What was his message about the true nature of their power and glory? Because it seems he challenged their whole understanding of sovereignty.
He absolutely did. In the Surya Muluk, Baha'u'lláh called out to the kings of the earth, saying, "Give ear unto the voice of God. Fear God, O concourts of kings, and suffer not yourselves to be deprived of this most sublime grace. Fling away then the things ye possess, and take fast hold on the handle of God, the exalted, the great."
Fling away the things ye possess.
He admonished them for failing to heed the Báb, who they unjustly slew. And he declared this profound truth about sovereignty. For your glory consists not in your sovereignty, but rather in your nearness unto God and your observance of his command as sent down in his holy and preserved tablets.
So true glory isn't earthly power.
Not according to this. He emphasized that earthly dominion is fleeting, temporary. True glory, true power comes from aligning yourself with divine will and serving humanity justly.
Okay, so beyond these really groundbreaking spiritual admonitions, did he offer them practical advice? Yeah, for governance, especially regarding the welfare of their subjects and preventing war, because that seems incredibly relevant even today, maybe especially today.
He laid out remarkably clear and frankly forward-thinking principles for just rule and global peace. He urged them. Compose your differences and reduce your armaments, that the burden of your expenditures may be lightened, and that your minds and hearts may be tranquilized.
Reduce armaments, compose differences, sounds familiar.
And then he explicitly stated, almost prophetically anticipating the carnage of the 20th century, "Heal the dissensions that divide you, and you will no longer be in need of any armaments except what the protection of your cities and territories demandeth."
Wow, that's a radical call for disarmament and collective security.
Yeah.
Way ahead of its time.
It was an early blueprint for what we now call collective security, where nations agree to act together against an aggressor. He also stressed social justice, stating, "Know ye that the poor are the trust of God in your midst. Watch that you betray not his trust, that you deal not unjustly with them."
The poor are trust from God.
Yes. And he warned them plainly of divine chastisement if they ignored these counsels. He asked them directly, "If ye stay not the hand of the oppressor, if ye fail to safeguard the rights of the downtrodden, what right have ye then to vaunt yourselves among men?" It's a direct moral challenge to their authority, exposing the hypocrisy of rulers who claimed piety but practiced oppression.
The book then gets into these striking details about Baha'u'llah's individual confrontations with specific rulers. This makes for really powerful reading. Let's start with Napoleon III of France. He was a huge figure in 19th century Europe. What did Baha'u'lláh say to him, and what was the stark consequence prophesied for his actions?
Right, Napoleon III. Baha'u'lláh addressed him with immense spiritual authority as, "O King of Paris." He challenged his spiritual blindness and materialism, saying things like, "Tell the priests to ring the bells no longer. By God the true one, the most mighty bell hath appeared."
Bold. Declaring a new era.
Extremely bold. He rebuked Napoleon not just for his initial indifference to the Báb's message, but also for his self-serving motives in the Crimean War. He said, "We tested thee, and found thee wanting. Hadst thou been sincere in thy words, thou wouldst have not cast behind thy back the book of God."
Tested and found wanting.
And then he delivered this stark, immediate prophecy. "For what thou hast done, thy kingdom shall be thrown into confusion, and thine empire shall pass from thine hands as a punishment for that which thou hast wrought. Then wilt thou know how thou hast plainly erred."
It didn't happen.
Famously, yes. Very soon after, Napoleon III lost his throne, and his empire collapsed in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. The prophecy was fulfilled with stunning speed.
That's incredibly direct. A powerful divine indictment that played out historically.
Okay, what about Pope Pius IX, the head of the Catholic Church at the time, wielding immense spiritual and temporal authority from the Vatican? What was Baha'u'llah's message to him?
To Pope Pius IX, Baha'u'lláh commanded, O Pope, rend the veils asunder. He who is the Lord of Lords is come overshadowed with clouds, and the decree has been fulfilled. It was a clear call for him to set aside old doctrines and recognize the new divine revelation that had appeared.
Rend the veils asunder. He highlighted the paradox. The Pope dwelling in palaces, while he who is the King of Revelation liveth in the most desolate of abodes, meaning Baha'u'lláh in prison. He urged him, sell all the embellished ornaments thou dost possess and expend them in the path of God, calling for detachment from worldly wealth and a return to spiritual simplicity.
A call for apostolic poverty, almost.
In a sense. And he also made this profound theological statement, asserting the fulfillment of Christian prophecy. Quote, the word which the Son, meaning Jesus, concealed is made manifest. It hath been sent down in the form of the human temple in this day. Blessed be the Lord who is the Father. He verily is come unto the nations in his most great majesty.
So, identifying himself as the return of the Father mentioned in Scripture.
That's the implication. It challenged the papacy directly to recognize a new divine manifestation, the promised return, in the person of Baha'u'lláh.
Okay, moving east. Tsar Alexander II of Russia, the ruler of that vast empire. His interaction with Baha'u'lláh had a slightly different feel, didn't it? Because of Russia's historical role.
It did, yes. There was a unique nuance. To the Tsar, Baha'u'lláh acknowledged an act of kindness. One of thy ministers extended me his aid during his imprisonment. This was a rare instance of official assistance.
So, some recognition.
A recognition, yes. And for this, Baha'u'lláh said, God had ordained for thee a station which the knowledge of none can comprehend except his knowledge. A rare commendation amidst many condemnations. However, he immediately followed it with a universal warning. Beware lest thy sovereignty withhold thee from him who is the supreme sovereign.
Don't let earthly power blind you.
Exactly. And he identified himself using prophecies familiar to the Tsar and his Christian subjects. I am the one whom the tongue of Isaiah hath extolled, the one with whose name both the Torah and the Evangel were adorned. It was a call to recognize the promised one, urging the Tsar to transcend his earthly power for divine recognition.
And Queen Victoria, Britain's queen, the most powerful monarch of her time, presiding over a global empire. Her address from Baha'u'lláh stands out, doesn't it? It seems distinctly different, containing words of praise.
It does stand out. Interestingly, Baha'u'lláh praised Queen Victoria for two specific actions that were remarkably progressive for that era. First, for forbidding the trading in slaves. He stated, this, verily, is what God hath enjoined in this wondrous revelation. He saw it as fulfilling a divine command, an act of justice.
He approved of the abolition of the slave trade.
Yes. And secondly, and this is very significant for the future of governance, he praised her for entrusting the reins of counsel into the hands of the representatives of the people.
Supporting parliamentary democracy.
Exactly. He stated, thou indeed hast done well, for thereby the foundations of the edifice of thine affairs will be strengthened. He also called upon her, and through her, all rulers, to embrace what Baha'is call the lesser peace. He said, be reconciled among yourselves, that ye may need no more armaments. Should anyone among you take up arms against another, rise ye all against him, for this is not but manifest justice.
Collective security again.
Precisely. Highlighting the practical application of Baha'i principles to global governance, long before institutions like the League of Nations or the UN were even thought of. It was a clear blueprint for international cooperation.
He also addressed the German Emperor, William I, and the Austro-Hungarian Emperor, Francis Joseph. What were his messages to these powerful Central European figures? Did they contain specific warnings or prophecies that seem particularly, chilling now?
They certainly did. To William I, Baha'u'lláh issued a very clear warning by reminding him of Napoleon III's recent downfall. Do thou remember the one whose power transcended thy power? Where is he? Whither are gone the things he possessed? Take warning, and be not of them that are fast asleep.
A direct warning based on recent history.
Yes, and then he delivered this specific and incredibly chilling prophecy about Germany's future. O banks of the Rhine, we have seen you covered with gore, and you shall have another turn. And we hear the lamentations of Berlin, though she be today in conspicuous glory.
Covered with gore. Another turn. Lamentations of Berlin. That sounds...
It's a direct foretelling of the devastation of the two world wars that would soon engulf Europe, both originating in large part from Germany. A truly stunning prophecy.
And Francis Joseph of Austria-Hungary.
To Francis Joseph, Baha'u'lláh noted something poignant. The emperor had apparently visited Jerusalem while Baha'u'lláh was imprisoned nearby in Akka. Baha'u'lláh wrote, "Thou passed him by and inquired not about him. We grieve to see thee circle round our name, whilst unaware of us, though we were before thy face."
So close, yet spiritually blind.
Exactly. Emphasizing this profound spiritual blindness despite physical proximity. Missing the divine presence right under his nose, so to speak.
And then finally, what about the two rulers who were directly responsible for his prolonged imprisonment and banishment? The Sultan Abdulaziz of the Ottoman Empire and Nuruddin Shah of Persia. What was the nature of his messages to them, given their direct oppression?
To Sultan Abdulaziz, the Ottoman ruler, Baha'u'lláh actually acknowledged his station, calling him God's shadow on earth, but immediately urged him to strive, therefore, to act in such a manner as befitteth so eminent, so august a station. He admonished the Sultan, "Place not thy reliance on thy treasures, put thy whole confidence in the grace of God," and told him to overstep not the bounds of moderation and deal justly with them that serve thee.
Advice on just rulership even to his captor.
Yes. And he even directly warned Constantinople itself, the seat of the Sultanate, saying, "The throne of tyranny hath verily been established upon thee, it shall soon perish." Another prophecy that dramatically came to pass with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I.
And Nuruddin Shah, the ruler of Persia, the one who started the persecutions.
Baha'u'llah's letter to Nuruddin Shah is particularly moving. He asserted the divine origin of his mission, saying, "I was but a man like others, asleep upon my couch, when lo, the breezes of the all-glorious were wafted over me, and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. This thing is not from me, but from one who is almighty and all-knowing."
Emphasizing it wasn't his own doing.
Exactly. And he distinguished his pure motive for advising the Shah even after all the persecution. "They that surround thee love thee for their own sakes, whereas this youth loveth thee for thine own sake, and hath had no desire except to draw thee nigh unto the seat of grace, and to turn thee toward the right hand of justice." It just underscores the selfless nature of the revelation, offered with love even to the one inflicting immense personal suffering upon him.
That's a truly remarkable historical record. Direct divine intervention, warnings, prophecies. Okay, so Shoghi Effendi, having detailed the world's pervasive rejection of the Baha'i Faith, then contrasts this rejection with the state of the world afterwards. What does he describe as the inevitable outcome of this global indifference and active suppression? He paints a picture of a world in crisis that feels, well, startlingly relevant today.
He does. He describes a world convulsed by the agonies of contending systems, races, and nations, entangled in the mesh of its accumulated falsities, receding farther and farther from him who is the sole author of its destinies, and sinking deeper and deeper into a suicidal carnage.
Suicidal carnage. Powerful words.
Very. He characterizes the world as spiritually destitute, morally bankrupt, politically disrupted, socially convulsed, economically paralyzed, writhing, bleeding, and breaking up beneath the avenging rod of God. This is the state, he argues, of a world that has turned its back on divine guidance. It's descending into chaos as a direct, inevitable consequence of rejecting the divine message for this age. It's like a sobering mirror held up to our global society.
That's a strong indictment. A comprehensive list of societal ailments, spiritually destitute, morally bankrupt, politically disrupted. It resonates with so many observations people have today. What specific societal failures or moral declines does he highlight as being symptoms of this dying order?
He points to several key things. He notes that the bright flame of religion is fast dying out, which leads to this profound spiritual vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum.
Right. Something else rushes in.
Exactly. While traditional religion fades for many, the forces of a blatant nationalism and racialism have usurped the rights and prerogatives of God himself, replacing universal loyalty with these narrow, divisive allegiances that inevitably lead to conflict. He also points to a flagrant secularism. The direct offspring of irreligion has raised its triumphant head, asserting a worldview completely divorced from spiritual purpose or meaning.
Secularism as the offspring of irreligion.
That's his framing. And perhaps most insidiously, he talks about how the virus of prejudice and corruption is eating into the vitals of an already gravely disordered society. This vision provides a powerful framework for understanding today's global challenges, showing how these seemingly separate issues, political gridlock, social fragmentation, economic inequality, moral confusion, might actually all be interconnected, rooted in a fundamental departure from spiritual principles and a turning away from the source of guidance.
Okay, so if one order is clearly dying, crumbling under the weight of its own failures, as you've described,
Yeah.
what is rising in its place? According to the promised day is come, there must be a hopeful counterpoint to this pretty bleak picture of decline. This is where the promise part comes in, isn't it?
This is precisely where the profound hope and the promise of the book's title become crystal clear. Shoghi Effendi identifies what he calls a dual phenomenon unfolding in our age.
Dual phenomenon.
Yes. While one aspect signals the death pangs of an order effete and godless, the second, simultaneous phenomenon, proclaims the birth pangs of an order divine and redemptive that will inevitably supplant the former.
Birth pangs happening at the same time as death pangs.
Exactly. He states that operating within the Baha'i community and its divinely ordained administrative structure, an embryonic civilization, incomparable and world-embracing, is imperceptibly maturing.
An embryonic civilization, maturing imperceptibly.
Meaning, even as the old system collapses, often violently and chaotically, a new divinely guided structure is emerging and gaining strength, often unnoticed by the masses, like a new world being quietly born from the ashes of the old. It's a process of simultaneous destruction and creation happening all around us.
So amidst all the chaos, all the dissolution, there's a definite trajectory towards something new, unified, and divine. This gives a profound meaning to the turmoil we see. It's not just random suffering. It's a purposeful, if incredibly painful, process.
Absolutely. This new order, he says, opens up vistas of a justice, a unity, a peace, a culture such as no age has ever seen. It's described as virile and unconquerable, gradually plucking asunder its chains, and is vindicating its title to be the one refuge within which a sore-tried humanity, purged from its dross, can attain its destiny.
Purged from its dross.
Baha'u'lláh himself prophesied this grand transformation very clearly. Soon will the present-day order be rolled up and a new one spread out in its stead. This offers such a powerful perspective on current events, doesn't it? It reframes suffering and challenges not just as random misfortune, but as part of a necessary process of purification and transformation, like a divine crucible shaping humanity for its destined, unified future.
It really does.
It reminds us that even in the darkest hours, from this perspective, there is a clear direction and a magnificent end goal for humanity, the establishment of truly global, just, and peaceful society. It's really an invitation to see the divine hand active in history, even perhaps especially in its most challenging moments. #tag outro.
As we conclude part one of our deep dive into The Promised Day Has Come, wow, we've really just begun to grasp the monumental scope of Shoghi Effendi's work. We've touched on the initial context of global turmoil, those profound principles of progressive revelation and unity that underpin the Baha'i Faith, and the just unimaginable sacrifices made by the Báb and Bahá'u'lláh for humanity's sake.
And we've seen how their direct appeals to the world's most powerful figures went largely unheeded, leading, according to Shoghi Effendi, to the current state of a dying, godless order. But importantly, this perspective offers more than just a historical account or a critique. It provides this profound framework for understanding the why behind the challenges we face today. And it points, hopefully, towards the inevitable emergence of a divine, world-embracing civilization, even amidst all the chaos and confusion.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about our individual role, our collective role in this unfolding drama. We've talked about the purpose of religion and spirituality being the promotion of amity and concord, and that need for a constant, unfettered search after truth. So maybe the question for you listening right now is, what does this all mean for you as you reflect on these powerful, maybe challenging insights?
Yeah, it raises a really important question, I think. In a world that Shoghi Effendi described as spiritually destitute and morally bankrupt, and as one order is visibly rolling up and another is perhaps less visibly spreading out, what does it mean for you to heed the call for justice and unity, in your own life, in your own community? How might you, in your own sphere of influence, contribute to building that lesser peace, the political and economic reconciliation Baha'u'lláh called for, and how can we prepare ourselves and our communities for the most great peace that is ultimately promised, a peace that will be founded not just on treaties or shared interests, but on true spiritual unity and justice for all?
That is a powerful thought to sit with. How do we contribute? A great question. And this is just the beginning. This has been part one of our three-part deep dive into the promised day has come. We'll continue this exploration in the coming days, so please be sure to tune in for part 2 and part 3 coming later this week.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay tuned.